Arfa pedaled through the foggy morning streets with her oversized school bag bouncing on her back and her worn-out shoes pressing hard on the rusted pedals of an old blue bicycle that squeaked with every turn. Her fingers were red from the cold, but she gripped the handles tightly as if the rhythm of this ride gave her life. She passed by glitzy cars with tinted windows and uniformed drivers, waiting outside luxury apartments where her classmates lived, and she kept her eyes straight, pretending not to notice them. The world she belonged to was far different from theirs, yet she wore her plain uniform with quiet pride, even when it had to be stitched again and again to hold itself together. Her hair was tied neatly, her books were wrapped carefully, and her soul remained untouched by the arrogance of money. But that wasn't enough for her classmates. The moment she rolled into the school gates, whispers began like smoke rising silently from fire. The girls in crisp blazers and designer shoes snickered, while the boys in expensive watches pointed fingers and muttered jokes about how poor she must be to ride a bicycle to school. A group of girls led by Adiba, the daughter of a top real estate mogul with a new iPhone every term, walked past Arfa and flicked their hair arrogantly. "Did your daddy lose his job? Or are you just doing charity work by coming here?" She sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. Arfa looked down and walked past. Without a word, her silence was her shield, but each word thrown at her was a dagger that cut through her quiet strength inside the classroom. Things weren't any better. Teachers tried to be impartial, but even they sometimes looked surprised when Arfa scored full marks in subjects she was supposed to struggle in. After all, according to everyone around her, how could a girl who couldn't even afford a car know anything about math or literature? During lunch, she sat under the banyan tree at the far end of the school ground, eating plain roti with leftover curry packed by her aunt. The others shared pizzas, pasta, and exotic snacks, taking pictures of their lunches while mocking hers at times. A piece of her dignity would crumble when someone tossed food near her like she was a stray dog, but she would look away and continue chewing each bite with the same calmness she had inherited from her late mother. Her father once told her, "Strength isn't in showing power, it's in not letting pain change your heart." But that lesson was tested every single day. Arfa had joined this prestigious school 2 years ago when a mysterious scholarship paid her full tuition. No one knew who granted it, not even the principal, but it allowed one exceptional student from a low-income background to study among the rich and powerful. Arfa was the first to receive it, and though her academic record stunned teachers, her humble appearance disgusted the students. She never talked about her home, her parents, or where she lived because it would only feed more gossip. The truth was, she lived with her aunt in a modest two-room house far from the city, in a neighborhood where water came on alternate days and streetlights flickered like dying fireflies. She woke up before sunrise, helped her aunt with chores, packed her bag, and pedaled her way to school with a resolve that most adults wouldn't carry on their shoulders. Every day after school, she would help her aunt sell homemade pickles door to door, sometimes facing insults and slammed gates, but never complaining when she returned home. She would read by candlelight whenever the electricity went out and dream silently of becoming someone whose name held value, not for money, but for meaning. But that dream was constantly buried under mockery on the sports field, during debate competitions, and even during school events, where no one ever chose her for any performance because she wasn't pretty enough, rich enough, or influential enough. Once during assembly, when students were asked to introduce their parents and their professions, everyone boasted proudly, "My dad owns this chain of restaurants. My mom is CEO of that fashion label." But when Arfa was asked, she said softly, "My father is no more, and my mother passed away when I was small. I live with my aunt who makes pickles." No one clapped like they did for others. Instead, strange hush followed, like someone had just turned down the lights, and that awkward silence stayed like a stain. From that day forward, they started calling her Pickle Girl, as if she were an object of amusement, not a person. Her locker was vandalized several times with pickle stickers, her books once thrown into a puddle, and when she tried to complain, she was told, "Boys will be boys, just ignore it." Sometimes she wanted to run away from everything, but each time she looked at the picture of her parents tucked inside her worn notebook, she remembered her promise. "I will make you proud even if the world laughs at me." Still, it hurt. It hurt when she heard whispers that maybe her scholarship was fake, or worse, maybe she was being helped. by a rich old man to stay in the school. The rumors were cruel, vile, and deeply cutting. But Arfa walked through them like a silent soldier, holding her head high and her pain buried deep inside, till one day something changed. A new competition was announced for a national science exhibition, and the winner would be flown to Dubai for a global summit. Arfa's eyes lit up not because of the prize, but because of the challenge. She stayed late in the library, borrowed books with torn covers, and watched YouTube videos in the tiny internet cafe near her home with borrowed coins, while the others hired private tutors and bought expensive kits. Arfa gathered recycled parts from her neighborhood, mechanic, and built a solar-powered irrigation model using syringes, cardboard, and mirrors. Her project amazed even the strictest science teacher. But Ariba and her group weren't happy. How can someone who smells like pickles beat us? They hissed. They sabotaged her project the night before the school level, judging by spilling glue on her mirror panels. But Arfa didn't cry. She stayed up all night fixing what she could and presented it with a smile. Her voice trembled slightly during the explanation, but her knowledge shone like a sunrise. When the results were announced the next day, her name was at the top. Arfa Zaman, the only one chosen to represent the school at the national level. The hall fell silent for the first time in 2 years. Everyone noticed her, really noticed her, as if she had transformed overnight from invisible to irreplaceable. The principal himself handed her the certificate and said, "We are proud to have you." And still the students whispered behind her back, "She's still poor, you know. She probably won't even afford the trip." But what none of them knew was that the next chapter of Arfa's life was about to rewrite everything, because behind the layers of poverty was a truth that no one had dared to imagine. The secret of her last name was about to surface, and it would leave the entire school speechless, including those who had mocked her since the day she arrived. The day Arfa prepared for the national science exhibition was unlike any other she had lived through. As she stood at the train station, dressed in her only ironed uniform, holding a small backpack filled with notes, spare wires, and the miniature solar model she rebuilt with care, her heart thumped, not from fear but from the overwhelming sense that her life was finally moving beyond the shadows of ridicule to a place where she could be seen for who she really was, a voice of truth, a mind of brilliance, and a heart that never surrendered. As she stepped onto the train and found her seat next to the window, the passing fields and power lines felt like pages of a new story being written. She reached the venue in the capital city where hundreds of students from elite schools across the country had gathered, and the air smelled of polished shoes, new perfume, and expensive gadgets. Most of the other participants had an entourage of teachers, parents, and helpers, while Arfa stood quietly alone, carrying her project in a recycled cardboard box that once held vegetables. She walked past rows of curious eyes and mocking glances, but her steps were steady, her eyes calm, and her resolve unshaken. The judging began, and her number was far down the list, so she waited silently while sipping water from a bottle she had refilled twice from the public tap. She watched projects made of AI robotics, drones, and smart sensors, some funded by companies, others clearly built with professional help, and still she smiled to herself, knowing that her hands, her ideas, and her late nights had created something pure, something real. When her turn finally arrived, she walked up with her box set, her model on the table, and began to speak. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was filled with clarity and conviction. She explained how solar energy could be harnessed with simple tools to create sustainable irrigation for drought-affected villages. She used terms even the judges hadn't expected from a girl in an oversized sweater and cracked shoes, and when the questions came, her answers were crisp, backed with logic and passion. The head judge, a stern-looking woman with silver-rimmed glasses, leaned forward and said, "Young lady, where did you learn to think like this?" Arfa simply smiled and said, "From watching my aunt water our garden without wasting a drop. Every idea begins at home, ma'am." The room was silent for a moment before applause broke out. Slowly but surely, judges clapped, and then others joined in, some out of genuine admiration, and some from shock that a girl who looked like she should be sweeping the floor was standing there speaking like a scholar. When the final results were announced, Arfa's name was once again at the top. This time, with more than just a certificate, she had won the grand prize, an all-expenses-paid trip to Dubai to present her project at the Global Youth Innovation Summit. Her hands trembled as she received the invitation letter. In metal, her eyes welled up not from pride, but from the memory of her parents and the journey she had taken to reach here yet, even in that moment of triumph. A storm was brewing back at her school. News of her victory spread like wildfire. Students whispered, how could she go to Dubai? She doesn't even have a passport. Does she even know what Dubai looks like? The mockery didn't stop, but this time it wasn't just envy, it was fear. Fear that the girl, as they laughed at, had become bigger than their expensive shoes and designer lives. But what they didn't know was the full truth behind her story, something even Arfa herself didn't fully understand, because hidden in the quiet corners of her past was a secret her aunt had buried long ago. For Arfa's safety, the day after the announcement, an expensive black car pulled up outside her school. A man in a dark suit stepped out with a file in his hand and walked straight to the principal's office. The man introduced himself as the legal advisor to a certain Mr. Cameron Zaman, and handed over documents that shocked the administration, because written clearly on the paper was the declaration that Arfa Zaman, daughter of the late billionaire Cameron Zaman and his wife Alina, had been found and was now to be granted full rights as heir to the Zaman legacy. The principal's hands shook as he read the letter over and over. The girl they had thought of as an underprivileged charity case was in fact the daughter of a tycoon whose wealth built half the city, including the very foundation that offered the scholarship to her 2 years ago. Back in class, Arfa was quietly solving a math problem when the intercom buzzed and called her to the principal's office. She walked there without knowing her entire life was about to change. As she entered the room, she saw the man in the suit standing beside the principal, who now looked both nervous and respectful. Arfa, please sit down, said the principal softly. The man stepped forward and said, Miss Zaman, I don't expect you to recognize me, but I worked for your father before his untimely death. We've been searching for you for years. We didn't know you had survived the accident, but your aunt protected you, hid you from the world, and changed your surname for your safety. We only found you after your name appeared in national media this week. Arfa blinked slowly, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or run. Her entire being felt like it had been unplugged from reality. The man continued, your parents died in a car crash orchestrated by business rivals years ago. Your father's will named you the sole heir, but when your body wasn't found, we assumed the worst. Your aunt was wise to disappear with you, but now, it's time for you to come home. Arfa's eyes searched the principal's face, and then the lawyers, for any sign that this wasn't some cruel prank, but they only looked at her with kindness and awe. Her knees felt weak and her heart thundered, but a tiny voice in her head whispered, your last name, Arfa Zaman. You were your father's daughter. You always were that night. Her aunt confirmed everything. She sobbed as she confessed how she faked identities, moved to a hidden place, and never told Arfa the truth to protect her from powerful enemies who had once tried to eliminate the Zaman family for good. But now, things had changed. The danger had passed, and the legacy was calling Arfa back. The next day, she arrived at school not on her bicycle, but in a luxury black car with tinted windows, driven by the same man in a suit. As she stepped out, students froze, mouths open, eyes wide. The same group that mocked her only a day ago stood speechless as the principal himself came out to greet her and escorted her inside. Suddenly, desks were wiped clean. Where she sat, locker doors were opened with reverence, and whispers changed tone from insult to admiration. Some came forward and congratulated her, some tried to apologize, but Arfa only smiled and nodded. She didn't seek revenge or rub her new truth in anyone's face. She walked with the same humility she always had, only now her name echoed differently in the halls of the school. It no longer carried the taste of poverty, it carried the weight of legacy. Teachers addressed her differently. Students treated her with unspoken awe, and yet in her heart, she remained the same Arfa who fixed her project with glue, who studied by candlelight, and whose dreams were powered not by gold, but by grit. She still sat under the banyan tree during lunch, but now others came and sat near her, quietly offering her snacks, asking questions, and learning that respect isn't born from wealth, but from endurance and grace. And though the world now saw her as a billionaire's daughter, Arfa never forgot what it meant to ride a bicycle with a rusted chain while carrying the weight of everyone's judgment on her back, because that weight had made her strong. And her strength had made the world finally see her. The air inside the marble-floored Zaman estate was heavy with the scent of fresh lilies, polished wood, and something Arfa couldn't name, but it wasn't just fragrance, it was memory as she walked through the grand arched hallways with paintings of her ancestors staring back at her, and walls that echoed with the silence of everything she had never known. Her steps felt like they didn't belong, but her blood knew this place her soul recognized, like a song forgotten in childhood suddenly. Remembered on a quiet evening, the staff bowed, the caretakers looked at her with awe, and whispered, "Welcome home, Miss Zaman." But Arfa didn't respond with grandeur. She simply nodded, still too overwhelmed by the weight of everything she had just stepped into. The mansion was her legal home. Now, the empire was her inheritance, the accounts, the properties, the global holdings, and the Zaman Foundation that had unknowingly funded her scholarship, all now legally belonged to her. But what felt most unreal was how quickly the world had changed around her, not because she had changed, but because their perception had the moment. News broke on social media that the bicycle girl from the science exhibition was actually the lost heiress of billionaire Kamran Zaman. The internet exploded. Her story was trending. Her name was in headlines. Schools across the country hailed her as an inspiration, and yet within the corridors of her own school, the reactions were more personal. Students who had once thrown paper at her now smiled like old friends. Teachers who once hesitated to assign her class duties now used her name with softened tones, and even Ariba, who had led the bullying with sharp cruelty, now stood awkwardly near her. Locker trying to strike a conversation that sounded like apology and invitation in one. But Arfa wasn't interested in revenge. She had lived through too many nights where her stomach rumbled with hunger and her pillows soaked her silent tears. She had learned that power used for punishment rots the soul, so she simply forgave but never forgot, and moved forward with grace. While others scrambled to rewrite their past behavior, one particular moment that stayed with her happened during morning assembly, when the principal asked her to come forward and address the school, the same stage where she had once stood in her plain uniform, revealing her parents' humble absence, now welcomed her like a queen. The students watched as she walked up, not in branded clothes or glittering jewelry, but in the same neat uniform she had always worn, only this time freshly stitched, with her old shoes polished until they shone. She took the mic with calm hands and said softly, "Thank you for seeing me now, but I was always here. I didn't grow bigger. You just started looking deeper." And with those few words, the auditorium fell silent, not out of obligation, but out of respect, because her voice had power now, not from wealth, but from truth. After the speech, invitations poured in from NGOs, women's groups, educational trusts, and even international conferences, but Arfa declined most of them, not because she was ungrateful, but because she wanted to first give back to the one place that had tried to break her and failed. She approached the school board and offered to fund a full scholarship program in her father's name for underprivileged children like her from every corner of the city, not just one student, but 10 every year, with books, uniforms, transport, and mentoring. And she asked for no special mention, no inauguration or media coverage, just a quiet beginning of change. The board agreed, and the announcement sent ripples through the student body. But she wasn't done yet. She quietly partnered with the Zaman Foundation and worked on developing solar irrigation kits based on the very model she had presented at the exhibition, and began distributing them in rural schools, conducting workshops, teaching children how to use them and inspiring them to innovate their own solutions. Each visit she made, she wore simple clothes, carried her own bags, and sat on the floor with the kids, because she knew real change comes from being among the people, not above them. Meanwhile, at school, her final year continued. But it felt different, not because of status, but because she now carried a responsibility bigger than grades or awards. She began mentoring juniors, helping them with projects, staying after hours to guide anyone who asked, and slowly she became not the rich girl or the mystery girl, but the role model, the one everyone wanted to learn from one day. During lunch, Ariba approached her, not with sarcasm or false friendliness, but with genuine remorse, and said, "I was cruel to you, and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted to say sorry. I judged you by your bicycle, not your mind, and I was wrong." Arfa looked at her quietly, then smiled and said, "We all learn some lessons later than others. I hope you teach the next person better." And with that, she offered a samosa from her lunchbox, and they sat down not as friends, but as two people who had finally seen each other clearly. Graduation came with its ceremonies, medals, photographs, and farewell speeches, and when Arfa's name was called for the highest academic honor, the auditorium erupted in applause. But the moment that touched everyone most was when she turned and hugged her aunt tightly in front of everyone, whispering, "Thank you for hiding me when the world wanted me gone and raising me with courage." Her aunt sobbed openly, and for once no one judged, because by now the entire school knew the truth of what that woman had done, and they honored her with standing applause. The day after graduation, Arfa visited her parents' grave for the first time since learning the full truth. She knelt before the simple headstones placed quietly in an old cemetery far from the city and laid white flowers on them, her hands trembling, as she whispered, "I made it, Baba Mama. I didn't let your name die, and now I will carry it with pride, but not for its wealth, for its values." And she sat there for hours, letting the wind dry her tears and the sun warm her back, as if the earth itself was holding her in its arms. Days turned into weeks, and soon her flight to Dubai arrived. She packed her bags now with a proper suitcase gifted by the foundation, but still carried the same blue notebook where her earliest project sketches lived. And as the plane soared into the clouds, she looked down at the city that once mocked her and whispered, "Thank you for making me strong in Dubai." She walked into the summit as the youngest delegate, wearing a hand-stitched traditional kurd paired with a smart jacket, and when her turn came to speak, she didn't just talk about solar energy. She spoke about dignity, compassion, and how the greatest inventions are born in silence and pain. She ended her speech with a line that made every heart in the audience beat louder. "Don't just fund the brightest minds, fund the invisible ones. Too, they shine the hardest." And when she stepped down, she received a standing ovation. It's not just from the audience, but from panelists, investors, and dignitaries who saw in her not just a brilliant girl, but a powerful voice for forgotten children across the world. When she returned to her country, she didn't go straight to the mansion. She went to her old school on her bicycle, still creaky, still blue, hers, and as she parked it in the same spot, students rushed to greet her, teachers smiled, and someone whispered, "She's still the same." And Arfa smiled, because that was the point. She never wanted to be anything but the same, only seen finally for who she really was. Her name now opened doors, her story inspired millions, and her foundation began to touch lives across continents. But within her, she remained the girl who once ate under the banyan tree alone and dreamt under candlelight of a world that would one day listen to her. And now that it did, she made sure it listened to others too, because her journey was never about becoming powerful. It was about proving that kindness, knowledge, and silent strength are more valuable than any crown, and that even a rusted bicycle can carry a queen if she rides it with dignity.